We are very fortunate to welcome our next guest who is here today to speak more about this one-of-a-kind publication. Major General James E. Livingston, a Medal of Honor and Silver Star recipient, appears in the section of the book regarding the Battle of Dido, which took place in early May 1968. And then a captain, he commanded E Company, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, as they were heavily outnumbered by 3 regiments of North Vietnamese Army. And it's been said the Battle of Dido is one of the greatest miracles against all odds in battle. Major General Livingston ranks among the top 25 servicemen of the Vietnam War with multiple high awards for valor, and has been a life member of the VFW for 47 years. Before I turn the floor over to him, it's my honor and pleasure to present him with a Gold Legacy Life Membership upgrade. Major General Livingston.
Good morning. Good morning. I hope you're having a good time in the Big Easy, huh? I used to live here for 14 years, and I had New Orleans fatigue and had to move to South Carolina. Mr. Commander, all the members of the VFW leadership, it is a pleasure to be here. And I really have been inspired by the program thus far. And thanks for honoring me and allowing me to come back to New Orleans. And to see Bob Crowder again. I would not be here if it wasn't for guys like Bob. Bob was with me with Echo Company's 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. And when the North Vietnamese decided to pick me as a target, I went down. And there was nothing better than having an old doc there with a good bandage and a shot of morphine. Took good care of me. And that's the reason I'm here today. I want to say good morning to all my fellow veterans and all the members of your family. And for wearing the cloth of the nation. We are the nation we are today, and without you, we wouldn't be America like we are today. You know, the VFW honors all of those who have worn the cloth of the nation, and most of all, those who have served and sacrificed on the field of battle. I deeply appreciate your leadership, I appreciate your programs, and I appreciate your continuing caring for those who have served and sacrificed. There's nothing better than taking care of your brothers and sisters. And the VFW does an absolutely great job in doing that. Mr. Commander, thank you so much for that kind of leadership. You know, this year, 2017, is a key year, and it is part of the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. And I am delighted to be with you here in New Orleans to be part of that recognition. We really gather here to remember those who have served our nation during conflict, but more solemnly, we remember those who, during this morning, that did not make it home. We remember those who paid the ultimate price for their service and sacrifice. There's been a real renewed interest in Vietnam, and I think it's time. I think the American people need to focus on those who served in Vietnam and their service and sacrifice. We see a lot of interest going in terms of the New York Times, and there's a documentary series coming out through PBS, and they'll talk about the Vietnam War. I would encourage all of you to look at that series, but I would also encourage you to be very critical of that series. I want to make sure they tell our story, and make sure they tell our story correctly. You know, apart from World War II, Vietnam is perhaps the most written about conflict in our history's existence. Several new books are either already or forthcoming, such as The Battle of Way City. It'll be about the Great Battle in 1968. There'll be other new publications coming out, but there's no better publication about the war in Vietnam than this publication put out by the VFW. I would ask all of you to get a copy of that book and remember the service and sacrifice of all those who served in Vietnam. The brutal battles of Vietnam, Americans' deadliest days from 1965 to 1972, is a prime example of good, unabashed journalism that tells the story of our conflict. And I ask all of you to read it and get a copy. As football player and veteran Rocky Breyer said, and I quote, "This work is a permanent keepsake that every Vietnam vet should possess to share with family and friends," end of quote. You know, unfortunately, our war is probably the most less understood war in the battle associated with our great country, with the exception of the Korean War. We remember such battles as Khe Sanh, Phu Bai, An Loc, and all those sort of come to mind. One that comes to mind and the Doc and I are involved in is the Battle of Dai Do. During my second tour in Vietnam, that was my second tour, I led Echo Company 2nd Battalion, 4th Marine Regiments in the Battle of Dai Do. During that particular operation, the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines are the magnificent bastards, lost 87 Marines in that fight and had over 300 wounded. We were a battalion up against a complete North Vietnamese division. But when I told those young Marines to fix bayonets and go forward and win that fight, they won that fight. And that is the spirit and the legacy of the veterans of Vietnam. That is your legacy. This battle is probably less known than a lot of the battles of Vietnam, but it was one of the most critical battles in Vietnam. If we had lost that fight, the combat base of Dong Ha would have been taken. Could you believe the North Vietnamese flag flying above Dong Ha? What that would have done to this country? If we had lost that fight, the war probably would have ended at that particular time. So to lose that battle was no choice. And at the end of the day, the United States Marine Corps, supported by the great Navy and Army, helicopter pilots, and all the people who were there, to include Air Force, won that fight. And just demonstrates the will and capability of the American fighting men to take it to the enemy and win the fight every time. You know, many myths have been created about Vietnam, and primarily created through the media. And some of these myths, I just want to mention very quickly. The myth was all the people who went to war in Vietnam were draftees. That was not the case at all. That's not to discount the great service of those who were drafted and went into Vietnam. But only 25% of those people who served in Vietnam were draftees. That just typifies the spirit of Americans. When their country asks them to do something, they're prepared to move forward and get the job done. Some other facts of those killed in Vietnam. People talk about most of the people killed in Vietnam were young Americans. That's not the case. People above 30 years old paid the price also. As a matter of fact, most of the casualties were in that category. Other myths regarding Vietnam was the fact that the Vietnam vet was not a well-educated soldier. 79% of those who served in Vietnam had high school diplomas. We hear other myths about the amount of people who are involved in combat. Let me tell you, in Vietnam, the percentage of people involved in combat and for the duration were the longest of any time in our history. When you went to Vietnam and went into the bush, you stayed in the bush basically until you were sent home either in a body bag or wounded, unless you rotated. And that was the legacy of Vietnam. We talk about drug addiction amongst the veterans of Vietnam. That was not the case at all. Very few of our people did drugs, contrary to what you see in the press. Again, a reflection of the capabilities and the quality of those who served in Vietnam. Of those who had drug issues, 97% of them went through rehab and became better Americans as a result of going through rehab. Another myth about that war was we lost every major engagement. We never lost a major engagement in Vietnam at all. We were often outnumbered, but we took the fight to the enemy, and we won every major fight in Vietnam. That is your legacy. Vietnam was not lost because of your performance on the battlefield. It was lost because of the performance in Washington, D.C. I've never met a Vietnam veteran that said, I would not do it again if my country called. If my country asked me to go down range, I'd be ready to go again. That's the legacy of the Vietnam veteran. We didn't select our war, but when the country asked us to go to war, we went to war and we won the fight against the enemy. That is our legacy. We also have to reflect about how that war was reported back home. The thing that really bothers me to the day is I see film clips of how that war was reported back home to the American people. The American people did not understand television. It was the first time war was televised from the battlefield. And the press didn't do us any favors. And they're continuing today not to do the Vietnam War any favors. I think we need to stand up and fight and really state our beliefs about what we did in Vietnam and what is the legacy of Vietnam, and make sure that it is properly represented to the American people as we move forward in our history. We were proud for what we did. I was proud to wear the cloth of a veteran or as a Marine 3 times in Vietnam. I was there from basically the beginning to the end. And let me tell you, one of the saddest times I ever had in my life was I was involved in the evacuation of Saigon. And look at the Vietnamese people as we were pulling out almost on the last helicopter, and have to look those people in the eye and say, I can't take any more of you with me. And I had moms who were trying to hand me their babies. That was my last impression of Vietnam. And let me tell you, of all the experiences I had in Vietnam, that's probably the most lasting experience. The second, and I should probably the primary lasting experience though, is when I go up to that wall in Washington, D.C., and I look at those 58,000 plus names, and I think about that ultimate service and sacrifice. And it's up to us to keep their legacy alive. We must make sure the American people understand their commitment and what they give for this nation. So as we move forward in this unique brotherhood, as our group is a band of brothers, we must continue to serve. We must continue to serve this country, and we must continue to keep on in the minds of American people what Vietnam was about and what it represented. And I'm reminded, as I close here, what Winston Churchill said. And Winston Churchill said, and I quote, "Only men with a heart of lions may save a nation of sheep from those who would dominate them." Meaning, if you're not willing to fight and win for your country, you don't deserve to live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. So to all of you who served in Vietnam, as your brother, I am here, and I wanted to be here to say thank you. I want to really thank the VFW for telling your story in their new book. I want all of you to get a copy of that book and reflect on your story. I want you to reflect on your service and sacrifice. I want you to reflect on what you give this nation. We are a great country because of people like you and the willingness to put on and wear the cloth of the nation. You are a special breed. You are special Americans. I admire every one of you. I love every one of you, and I thank you for that willingness to step up and serve and sacrifice for this great nation. We will only be the home of the free and the home of the brave as long as those like you are willing to put on the cloth of the nation and say, I solemnly swear I am prepared to defend this great nation and go forward and serve where my country directs me. You are special. God bless you, and Semper Fi.
As you take your seat, I can't think of any better time for us, the Gulf War veterans and those that came after, that took the legacy of the Vietnam veterans and those that served even before Vietnam. So let them hear next door in the convention, all those Vietnam veterans that wore the cloth of our nation. Please stand, and all those that did not serve in Vietnam, let's raise the roof and thank them again. Vietnam veterans, please stand and be recognized. Thank you.